Hi everybody. Today we're out in the hardwood forests of eastern North America taking a look at some of these hardwood trees out here. Now, hardwood trees, how is this different from, what's the difference between a hardwood and a softwood? Well, where I'm from in the Pacific Northwest, we have a whole lot of conifers. We call them softwoods. We call these deciduous trees around me here hardwoods. This is an old timber designation, and it doesn't necessarily actually say anything about any particular individual tree, but generally, these deciduous trees have harder wood than a conifer. That's not always true, but the point is, we're in a very different forest from where I usually get to film today, and we're going to take a chance to look at some of the trees here. We have an entirely different set of players looking out for that one resource that trees really need, sunlight. And we're going to talk about one of the biggest ones that you can find out here, just an impressively large tree out here in eastern North America, and learn a little bit about that tree and how it connects in to the local forest ecosystems here. So, what tree of the eastern hardwood forest are we going to be looking at today? Well, today we're going to be looking at the tulip tree. And before we talk about how to identify it, we need to talk about where can you find it in the first place in its natural habitat. Today, I'm filming in northern Kentucky, and that's about the center of this tree's range. It occurs down into the southern states from Florida all the way west to Louisiana, and also up into the northeast and southern parts of Canada around the Great Lakes. So now that you know where to find it in its natural habitat, we're going to go and look at how you identify it once you get there. All right, so identification of the tulip tree or the tulip poplar. How can we tell this tree if we come across it in the wild? Well, the first thing is the name tulip tree tells us a little bit about this tree already, and the fact is that the flowers of this tree look an awful lot like tulips. Now, the problem with that is this is a tree, and so those flowers are often going to be occurring way above the level that we can see. Now, there's a couple other features that we can look for. The bark isn't going to be a huge indicator because the bark of this tree is kind of gray and fissured, and that's really common, especially in these eastern hardwood forests that this tree likes to grow in. But there is one feature that really stands out, and that's the leaves. If we look around on the ground right here, you can see leaves scattered about. It's fall, they're all beautifully yellow. And what that tells us is that this is a deciduous tree, meaning that it loses its leaves in the winter. That's also extremely common in the eastern hardwood forest. But what isn't common is that the leaves of the tulip tree, they're actually in this shape that tells us that this tree shares a common evolutionary ancestor with the house cat. You can see here the ears and then the whiskers coming off, and that's why this tree is actually a mammal. And I made that completely up, but it probably will help you to tell the shape of these leaves that look like the faces of a little cat. Now, there's one more feature that we can look at this tree that makes it very different from most eastern hardwoods. We're going to get out there and check that out now. I'm out here now in the woods with my friend, the tulip poplar tree. Now, the final big identification trait that we're going to talk about with tulip poplars here is a growth habit that we call columnar growth. Think of a column like in front of a big fancy building. These trees grow kind of like that, straight up towards the sky, very straight and narrow, sometimes without branches for dozens and dozens of feet. Now, why would a tree have a growth habit like this? Well, we're going to talk about a concept that's called apical control. Now, that takes some breaking apart. What is apical control? Well, first thing is, we need to know what an apical bud is. Think of the apex being the top of something. The apical bud is going to be the top bud on a twig. Now, when that bud opens and sends out new growth each spring, what we can expect is that if this bud has what we call high apical control, that apical bud will break open and send growth straight up towards the sky. If it has low apical control, that bud might break open and shoot off new growth sideways or downwards, kind of in any direction. And we can really see this in a lot of different types of trees. Some trees like to grow very straight and tall, like our friend the tulip poplar, and other trees really spread out like a huge spreading oak tree. Now, what's the advantage of having the different kinds of apical control? Well, we'll talk about the advantages of the high apical control that the tulip poplar has in its native hardwood forests here on the eastern part of North America. So the question of why would a tree have a trait of high apical control? Why would it grow straight up towards the sun? And the answer is pretty simply seen when you look around these forests here, oftentimes you'll see mature tulip trees like the one next to me here, and you'll look up at the top of the canopy and you'll notice that these trees stick up above the other trees growing around them. And this gives them an advantage because it means that they have all of the sunlight up there above the forest canopy without having to worry about being shaded out by some of these other hardwoods growing around us. And because trees need sunlight in order to photosynthesize and make the energy that they need to survive, that's really awesome that they can grow up to that size. In fact, tulip trees are some of the tallest hardwood species on the continent. They can easily achieve heights of about 150 feet, sometimes almost up to 200 feet tall. And in order to support that, they can get trunks up to 6 feet in diameter, which is way larger than a lot of other things that you can find out here. It's comparable to some of the coniferous giants that we see back in my home area of the Pacific Northwest. Now, of course, these trees aren't born being 150 feet tall. They have to get there. So we're going to talk a little bit about the traits of how does this tree survive its time down here in the shady understory where I'm sitting right now. Growing up in the shady understory of any forest is really difficult. And the tulip trees, they have to get past the fact that there isn't much sunlight down here. And the way they do that ties in again to that high apical control. These trees are putting their energy into growing tall rather than spreading out and having these big bulky branches that some other trees might do. And because of that, they can grow at an extremely fast rate of up to 2 feet a year, which is only matched by a couple other species out here, maybe the cottonwood and the sycamore. Now, what this results in is these trees, from when they sprout as a seedling, they can grow up to be above the canopy level in just a matter of decades. And because they're not sending out those heavy branches, oftentimes what you'll see is these big trunks just going towards the sky, sometimes with no branches, for as much as 80 or 100 feet. Now that's one way that these trees are beating the fact that there isn't much sunlight around here to get up quick to be enjoying the place in the sun. Now we've learned about how the tulip poplar fits into the ecosystem as a tree that rises above the rest of the canopy with that super tall straight growing habit, but how does this tree connect to us as human beings? Well, one way we can look at that is through the lens of the indigenous people of Eastern North America who have known this tree for the longest. Different indigenous nations, of course, have different uses for different plants because this tree grows from Canada all the way south into the south part of what is today the United States. But some of the main uses across that region would be for the creation of medicine. The bark of this tree can be boiled down into a medicine that can be used to treat rheumatism and also things like fever. And you can also get a medicine that can be applied topically to things like bites and fractures on the skin to help them heal. Now, perhaps one of the most important traditional uses for this tree is as a canoe tree. We've already talked about how these trees can grow to just immense sizes and heights over a period of almost 500 years, so that long growth combined with that huge side makes for a big, strong piece of wood, and if you dig that out, you can make a wonderful canoe, sometimes dozens or even 100 feet long. So this tree, extra important as a traditional source of canoe wood here. Now it's also used primarily by Euro-Americans running timber operations as a timber tree, and timber is very important, and it's nice to have a very tall tree like that. Important to remember though, because these trees live for 500 years, we want to be making sure some of them can live out that full lifespan and get to that full height. In addition to that, these trees are very popular in a city context, and they can be planted as an urban ornamental, and because they have that tall straight growing trait, they're not going to be spreading out as much and causing problems as some trees do. The next time you're out in the forest, take a look around and see if you can spot a tulip tree. And remember how this tree connects you with the rest of the ecosystem. Hi everybody, I hope you enjoyed this tree video. If you want to learn a lot more about trees, you can keep up with this page by subscribing to it. And if you want to help it grow a little bit more, please consider sharing these videos out to more friends. Thanks so much for watching.